I remember exactly where I was when the first transmission came through. Not because I was doing anything important, but because it was so utterly ordinary that the contrast still makes my head spin. March 14th, 2047, 2:47 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I was sitting in my apartment in what used to be called Brooklyn, staring at a half-finished report about agricultural output projections for the North American reclamation zones. The report was due in 4 hours, and I'd been procrastinating by watching old videos of my daughter learning to walk. She was 6 now, her tiny hands gripping the edges of furniture like she was scaling mountains. The vid was grainy, taken on an old phone that had been in my family since before the climate shift. My mother's voice came through the speakers, laughing as my daughter wobbled and fell. Again, again, the little voice demanded. I smiled, reaching for my coffee. It was cold again. That's when the sky changed. Not gradually, not with any kind of warning. One moment it was the usual pale gray of a New York spring afternoon, the kind of overcast that made everything look like it was wrapped in gauze. The next moment, it was the color of fresh blood. I dropped my mug. It shattered on the floor, coffee spreading across the old wood like a stain I'd never be able to clean up. I remember thinking that's not how red works. Red is a color you see. You don't feel it. But I felt that red. It pressed down on me, heavy and thick, like the entire sky had turned into a blanket soaked in something wet and warm. Outside, people were screaming. I could hear it even through my windows, which were supposed to be soundproofed. That's how loud it was. Car alarms, dogs barking, the distant wail of sirens that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I ran to my window, and that's when I saw them. I'd seen spaceships in movies, in games, in the kind of cheap entertainment that had become popular after the world started falling apart. But those were always sleek, beautiful things. Silver needles against the black of space. Elegant, purposeful. What I saw outside my window was none of those things. The ships were massive, angular, and wrong. They hung in the air like they'd been carved from obsidian, their surfaces drinking in the red light of the sky instead of reflecting it. No windows, no lights, no sense of scale until I realized that one of them was blotting out the Manhattan skyline entirely. I stood there, my hand pressed against the glass, and I couldn't breathe. My apartment was on the 23rd floor. I'd always liked the view, even when the air was too thick with particulate matter to see more than a few blocks. Now I wished I was underground, wished I was anywhere else, wished I could sink into the floor and disappear. The ships didn't move, they just waited. I don't know how long I stood there. Minutes, maybe, hours. Time had stopped meaning anything. My phone buzzed in my pocket and I fumbled for it, my fingers clumsy and uncoordinated. Emergency alert. All citizens remain indoors. Do not attempt to engage. Wait for further instructions. The message was from the Global Defense Network, the organization that had been formed after the first alien contact 15 years ago. We'd known they were out there, the other civilizations among the stars. We'd known for over a decade that they were watching us. We just didn't know what they wanted. Now we knew. I found out later that the red sky wasn't just affecting my part of the world. Everywhere on Earth, at the same moment, the sky had changed. Every city, every country, every person on the planet had looked up and seen the same thing. The ships were everywhere, thousands of them, tens of thousands. And then the message came. I didn't hear it, I felt it. It started in my skull, behind my eyes, a pressure that made me want to claw at my own head. I dropped to my knees, gripping my temples, and that's when the words began to form in my mind. Not words, understanding. It was like being flooded. Like a dam had broken inside my brain and water was pouring in, carrying meaning and intent and terror. People of Earth, you have been observed, you have been judged, you have been found wanting. The voice was calm, clinical, like a doctor telling you that you had 6 months to live. Your species has been permitted to develop for far too long unchecked. Your aggression, your greed, your capacity for destruction. You are anathema to the galactic order. I could see things, images that came with the words, visions of war and pollution and violence, all the worst parts of humanity playing out like a highlight reel of our sins. Bombed out cities, burning forests, children crying in the rubble. But I could also see something else, the source of this message, a race of beings so alien that my mind struggled to process them. They were tall, impossibly tall, with skin like liquid silver and eyes that held no warmth. Their faces were long and angular, and they moved with a grace that seemed to mock the clumsiness of human motion. You have been given warning. Surrender your weapons. Dismantle your DEFENSES. Submit to OUR authority. If you resist, we will make an example of your world. We will teach the lesson that no primitive species may challenge the cosmic order. The pressure in my head eased, and the images faded. I was left gasping on the floor, my face wet with tears I didn't remember crying. Outside, the red sky was beginning to fade, returning to a more ordinary gray. The ships remained. I couldn't move for a long time. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to process what had happened. Surrender your weapons, dismantle your defenses, submit. The words echoed in my mind, and I felt a cold certainty settle into my bones. They didn't know us. They had no idea who they were dealing with. My phone started ringing an hour later. It was my ex-wife, Maria. "Marcus," she said, and her voice was shaking. "Marcus, are you okay? Are you with Maya?" I sat up, my head pounding. "She's with you, isn't she? She was supposed to be with you this week." "She's here," Maria said, and I heard her take a shaky breath. "She's scared. She keeps asking about the red sky." I swallowed hard. Tell her everything's okay. Tell her I'll be there as soon as I can." "Marcus, what's happening? What was that thing, the voice in my head?" "I don't know," I said, and I hated how weak my voice sounded. "I don't know what's happening, but I'm coming to get you, both of you." I knew I wasn't supposed to leave my apartment. The emergency alert had told me to stay indoors, but I couldn't stay there. I couldn't just sit in my apartment and wait for whatever was going to happen. The streets were chaos. People were running everywhere, some carrying bags, some carrying children, some carrying nothing at all. Cars were abandoned in the middle of the road, their doors hanging open. A storefront had been smashed in, and I could see people grabbing supplies, their faces wild with panic. I ran. I'd never been much of a runner, but fear is a powerful motivator. I dodged through the crowds, pushed past people who were standing frozen in the middle of the sidewalk, and tried not to look at the ships that were still hanging in the sky. Maria's apartment was on the other side of the neighborhood, in a building that had seen better days. The lobby was empty, the security desk abandoned. I took the stairs instead of the elevator, my heart pounding, my lungs burning. She opened the door before I could knock. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed, and she pulled me inside before I could say anything. "Where's Maya?" I asked. "Hiding," Maria said. "She's in her room, she won't come out." I found my daughter curled up in the corner of her bed, a stuffed dinosaur clutched to her chest. She looked so small, so fragile, and when she saw me she launched herself into my arms. "Daddy," she whispered. "Daddy, I was so scared. The sky turned red and I couldn't see anything, and there was a voice in my head and—" "SHH," I said, stroking her hair. "It's okay, I'm here now, everything's going to be okay." I didn't believe it for a second, but she was 6 years old and she needed to hear it. The second message came 3 hours later. This time, it wasn't just a feeling in my head. The ships themselves began to broadcast, their words appearing on every screen in the world. "To the leaders of Earth, you have 96 hours to respond to our DEMANDS." The demands were laid out in cold, clinical detail. We were to disarm all weapons, both nuclear and conventional. We were to dismantle every military installation on the planet. We were to submit to a worldwide registry of all people, with the understanding that any resistance would be met with lethal force. And we were to build a monument, a tribute to the new order, carved into the surface of the planet itself, something that would be visible from space. This is not a request. This is not a negotiation. This is the only offer you will receive. Comply or be destroyed. I was back in my own apartment by then, having convinced Maria to bring Maya to stay with me. We were sitting in my living room, the three of us huddled together, watching the message play out on the television. Can they do that? Maria asked. Can they really just destroy us? I didn't have an answer. None of us did. But I saw something in the eyes of the people around me, something I didn't expect. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was anger. The world didn't surrender. That's the first thing you need to understand. We were scared, yes. We were terrified, but fear isn't the same as submission. Fear is what makes you fight. I wasn't there for the emergency sessions of the Global Defense Council. I was just a mid-level analyst, a nobody in the grand scheme of things. But I heard the rumors. I heard the whispers. They think they can just show up and tell us to kneel. We've been fighting each other for thousands of years. You think we're afraid of them? Let them come. Let them see what happens when you push humanity to the edge. The official response came 24 hours later. It was broadcasted on every channel, every screen, every device on the planet. A woman stepped up to the podium. General Sarah Chen, commander of the Global Defense Network. She was in her 60s, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that had seen too much war. Her uniform was simple, practical, and she looked into the camera with an expression that I'll never forget. To the beings who have threatened our world, she said, her voice calm and steady, we have received your demands. She paused and I could see her hands gripping the edges of the podium, not in fear, in resolve. Humanity has been fighting for its survival since the day we first stood upright. We have faced predators. We have faced plague. We have faced each other in wars that nearly destroyed us. And we have survived. The room was silent. Even Maya, who was sitting in my lap, seemed to understand that something important was happening. You believe that we will submit. You believe that we will kneel. But you do not know us. You do not know what we are capable of. She looked directly into the camera, and I swear I saw the corner of her mouth twitch. Not quite a smile, something fiercer. We have studied your ships. We have analyzed your technology, and we have found your weakness. A murmur went through the crowd behind her. Even the reporters, who were supposed to be impartial, couldn't hide their shock. You rely on fear. You rely on the belief that no one would dare resist you. But we are human, and we have always dared. She leaned forward. 60 years ago, we were still fighting each other with sticks and stones. 100 years ago, we thought powered flight was impossible. 1,000 years ago, we believed the gods lived in the sky. But we changed. We grew. We learned. Her voice hardened. If you want to destroy us, you will have to try, but we will not make it easy. We will not make it simple. And we will not make it clean. This is our home, and we will defend it with everything we have. She stepped back from the podium, and the transmission ended. I didn't know what to feel. I was proud, but I was also terrified. We had just told a superior force that we were going to fight them. We had just declared war on beings who could turn our sky red with a thought. But as I looked around at the people on the street, at the faces on the television, I saw something I hadn't expected. They were cheering. The 96 hours became an eternity, and an instant all at once. I was assigned to a new department. We didn't have a name, at least, not one that was shared with the public. We were just strategic analysis, and our job was to figure out the aliens' weaknesses. It turned out General Chen was right. We had found something. Their technology was incredible, but it was also specific. The red sky, the voice in our heads, the ships that hung in the air, it was all designed to intimidate, to make us feel small and powerless. But it wasn't designed for war, not a real war. They had weapons, obviously, but their weapons were built for suppression, not destruction. They were meant to control, not to annihilate. They'd never faced a species that would fight back. "These are parasites," my supervisor said one night, his voice hoarse from too much caffeine and not enough sleep. "They go from world to world, imposing their will on primitive species. They've done it for thousands of years." "And no one's ever fought back?" I asked. He shook his head. "Maybe some have tried, but the fear is the real weapon. The red sky, the voice in your head, it breaks people before they can even think about resistance." I thought about Maya, hiding in her room, clutching her stuffed dinosaur. I thought about the terror I'd felt when the voice had filled my mind. "They never counted on us," I said. "They never counted on humanity." The truth was more complicated than that. We weren't united. We'd never been united. There were people who wanted to surrender, who believed that fighting was pointless. There were people who welcomed the aliens, who thought they would save us from ourselves. But those people were in the minority. Most of us were like me, terrified, uncertain, but determined to do something, anything, to protect what we had. The defense plan was simple. It had to be simple because we didn't have time for anything else. "You want us to build ships," I said, staring at the schematics in disbelief. "We don't have a choice," my supervisor said. "We can't fight them on the ground. We need to meet them in space. We barely have a space program. We've only been to Mars once, and that was a disaster." "We have 72 hours," he said. "That's all we've got. The scientists are working on something. They'll have it ready in time." I didn't believe him, but I didn't have a choice either. It wasn't just the official military response. All over the world, people were organizing. I saw it in the neighborhood where I grew up, a place that had been forgotten by the government for years. The streets were empty for once, but that didn't mean they were quiet. People were talking, planning, preparing. "Hey, Marcus." I turned to see Jamal, an old friend from my school days. He was standing in front of his mechanic's shop, wiping grease off his hands with a rag. "You see what's happening?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded, hard to miss. "The aliens think they can push us around. They don't know who they're dealing with." "What are you doing?" Jamal looked at me for a long moment. Then he gestured for me to follow. Inside the shop it was chaos. People were everywhere, welding, hammering, building. And what they were building. "Are those weapons?" I asked, staring at the rows of metal objects being assembled. Jamal nodded. "We're not waiting for the military to save us. If the aliens come down here, we're going to be ready." "How did you even?" He shrugged. "People have a lot of stuff. Old guns, scrap metal, spare parts. You'd be surprised what you can do with a little ingenuity and a lot of determination." I saw a group of teenagers working on something that looked like an improvised rocket launcher. An elderly woman was organizing a supply chain, her voice sharp and commanding. A young couple was teaching everyone how to fight, how to defend themselves in hand-to-hand combat. "This is insane," I said. "You're going to get yourselves killed." Jamal looked at me with eyes that held no fear. "Maybe," he said, "but we're not going to surrender, not to them, not to anyone." I couldn't argue with that. It happened on the third day. The aliens had given us 96 hours. They didn't expect us to use them for preparation. They expected us to spend them in fear, in conflict, in chaos. We surprised them. The first shots were fired from the surface. Not by the military, but by a group of civilians who had managed to build an improvised weapon that could reach the ships in orbit. It was crude, barely functional, and it didn't do much damage, but it showed them something they hadn't expected. They weren't afraid. The aliens responded immediately. A single ship descended from the sky, its massive form blotting out the sun over a city in what used to be Brazil. It didn't fire weapons. Instead, it sent down a wave of energy that silenced everything for miles. I saw the footage later, passed through encrypted channels. The energy wave had neutralized every electronic device, every engine, every piece of technology in the city. People were left in the dark, their phones dead, their cars stopped, their entire modern world crumbling around them. But they didn't surrender. "We can't just sit here," I said to my supervisor. "We need to do something." "What exactly do you suggest?" he asked, his voice strained. I didn't have an answer, but I knew we couldn't just wait for the aliens to make the next move. That's when General Chen made her decision. She ordered the launch of every weapon we had. Nukes, conventional missiles, even the prototype energy weapons that scientists had been developing in secret. She threw everything at the alien ships. Most of it didn't work. Their shields or whatever they had absorbed the impact, but some of it did. A few of their ships were damaged. A few of them fell. It wasn't a victory, not really. We had barely scratched them, but we had shown them that we could fight. The alien response came quickly. They unleashed their true power. Not destruction. They could have destroyed us with a thought, I'm sure of it, but they didn't. They wanted to make us suffer. They wanted to break our will. The ships descended lower, hovering just above the ground. They sent down waves of energy that made our technology useless. They disrupted our communications, our transportation, our food supply. And then they sent down their soldiers. I didn't see them myself. I was in a bunker under the city, surrounded by maps and screens that were slowly going dark, but I heard the reports. They were tall, impossibly tall like the beings in the vision. Their skin was metallic, reflecting light in a way that made them hard to look at. They moved silently, effortlessly, and they carried weapons that seemed to be extensions of their own bodies. They didn't kill indiscriminately. They targeted resistance leaders. They destroyed military installations. They took prisoners. But the civilians fought back, with anything they could find, and the aliens seemed almost surprised. "They're not soldiers," I heard someone say. "They're enforcers. They're used to fear, not to fight." I thought about Jamal and his improvised weapons. I thought about the teenagers with their rocket launchers. I thought about the elderly woman organizing supplies. We were fighting with sticks and stones, and somehow, impossibly, we were making a difference. It happened on the fourth day. I don't know what changed. Maybe the aliens got tired of waiting. Maybe they decided that we needed a lesson. Maybe they just got sick of our resistance. But they stopped trying to make us surrender. They started trying to destroy us. The ships rose higher into the sky and beams of light descended, carving through buildings and streets and people. The destruction was absolute, relentless, and I thought we were going to die. But then something happened. We found the weakness. All of our analysis, all of our preparation, all of our desperate scrambling, it had been for this moment. A single vulnerability in their technology, one that we had identified but never confirmed. Their energy shields were connected. Each ship shared its defensive capabilities with the others, creating a network that was nearly impenetrable. Nearly. But there was a weak point, a frequency that the shields couldn't adapt to, a weapon that could bypass their defenses entirely. "We don't have time to build it," my supervisor said. But we didn't need to build it, we already had it. The energy weapons that scientists had developed in secret, the ones that had never been properly tested, they were designed for this. We had the technology, we just hadn't known what it was meant for. General Chen gave the order. Every energy weapon on the planet was aimed at the alien ships. The results were immediate. The beams of light pierced the shields, cutting through the metallic hulls like they were made of paper. Ships began to fall, their lights dying as they tumbled toward the ground. I watched it happen on a screen in the bunker. I saw the alien ships crash into the ocean, into the mountains, into the empty desert. I saw the fire and the smoke and the destruction. And I realized in that moment that we had actually done it. We had won. The aliens didn't surrender, not exactly. They pulled back. Their remaining ships retreated into the sky, disappearing into the red that still lingered on the horizon. They didn't send any more messages. They didn't make any more demands. But they also didn't leave. The ship stayed in orbit, watching, waiting. We had won the battle, but the war was far from over. I returned to my apartment days later. The building had survived, though it was covered in dust and debris. I found my coffee mug, still broken on the floor, the dried stain of my coffee, a reminder of how quickly everything had changed. Maya was staying with her mother. I had tried to keep in touch, tried to be a father despite everything that was happening, but it was hard. She was scared, and I couldn't promise her that things would be okay. But I could promise her something else. "Daddy," she said over the vidlink, her face pale and tired, "when are you coming home?" "Soon," I said, "I promise." "What if the bad people come back?" I looked into her eyes, and I made a decision. "Then we'll fight them again," I said, "and we'll win again because that's what we do." She was quiet for a long moment, then she nodded. "I'm not scared," she said. "I know," I said, "neither am I." Weeks passed, months. The ships stayed in orbit, but they didn't attack. The red sky faded, replaced by something that looked almost normal. People started to leave their homes, to rebuild, to try to make sense of what had happened. The aliens sent a new message, this one different from the first. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't a threat. It was a question. "Who are you?" It was the first time they had acknowledged us as something more than a primitive species. The first time they had treated us as equals. General Chen responded. I don't know what she said, but I know it worked. The aliens opened a dialogue. They wanted to understand us. They wanted to understand how we had resisted them. It wasn't a surrender, it wasn't an apology, but it was a start. I kept working, kept analyzing, kept doing my small part to help humanity survive. The world was different now, marked by the battle we had fought and the scars we had earned. But we were still here, we were still alive, and we were still human. I never thought I would understand the aliens. Not really. Their minds were too different, their perspectives too alien, but I started to glimpse something in their messages. They were afraid. Not of our weapons, though those had been effective. They were afraid of us, of what we had become. We had turned their warning into a war. We had fought back when we should have surrendered. We had refused to kneel. I thought about my daughter, Maya. She was 7 now, growing up in a world that had been turned upside down. She had never known a time when the sky was always blue, when the ships were not hanging in the air, when the threat of annihilation wasn't a constant shadow. But she was happy, she was strong, she was human. I sat on my balcony one night watching the stars. The ships were still there, but they were just dots now, blending in with the other lights in the sky. I remembered the day everything changed. The red sky, the voice in my head, the terror that had gripped the world. I remembered what General Chen had said. We had always fought for survival. We had always found a way. I thought about the people I had met. Jamal with his improvised weapons, the teenagers with their rocket launchers, the elderly woman organizing supplies. We were a species of fighters. We had always been fighters, and we would always be fighters. The aliens left eventually. Not entirely, but enough. They relocated their ships to the far side of the moon, where they could watch us without being seen. They opened diplomatic channels, and we started to learn about their world. They had never met a species like us. A species that would fight back, that would refuse to surrender, that would turn a warning into a war. We were a puzzle to them, a threat to the order they had imposed on the galaxy. And I liked that. We were still human. still flawed, still capable of incredible cruelty and incredible kindness, still the same species that had nearly destroyed itself 100 years ago, and the same species that had stood up to a superior force and refused to kneel. The warning was meant to make humanity surrender, but it had made us something else. It had made us ready. The aliens taught us something valuable. They taught us that we were not alone in the universe. They taught us that there were threats out there, dangers that we could never have imagined. But they also taught us something else, something more important. We were stronger than we knew. We were braver than we believed. We were capable of more than we ever thought possible. And we could survive. I walked through the city that night watching people rebuild their lives. The streets were alive again, filled with light and sound and laughter. Children played in the parks and couples walked hand in hand. There were still scars, still damage, still wounds that would take years to heal. But we were moving forward. That's what we did. We survived, we adapted, we grew. I found myself at the spot where I had first seen the ships. It was a park now, a memorial to the people who had died in the first battle. There were flowers and candles and small flags, all arranged in a careful pattern that spelled out a single word. I stood there for a long time thinking about what it had taken to get here. The fear, the courage, the determination. And I realized that the aliens had been wrong. They had thought they could break us, but we were unbreakable. The warning was meant to make humanity surrender. It made Earth prepare for war. And we were ready. Months turned into years. The world moved on, but it was never the same. We had been changed by what happened, and we would never go back to the way things were. The aliens became a part of our lives, not as enemies, but as something else, something complicated and strange and wonderful. We learned from them. They learned from us. We found common ground in the most unexpected places. I watched my daughter grow up in this world. She would never know the world I had known, the world before the warning. But she would know a different world, a world that was more connected, more aware, more alive. And I found that I was okay with that. Because she was human, she was strong, she was my daughter. And she would never surrender. I'm old now. I'm sitting in my apartment, staring at the same sky that had once turned red. The ships are still there, a constant reminder of what we faced and what we overcame. My daughter is a scientist now. She works with the aliens, trying to understand them, to bridge the gap between our worlds. She's married to a man from the colony on Mars, a place that had been built after the war. And she has a daughter of her own, a little girl with her mother's smile and her grandmother's stubbornness. The cycle continues. Humanity endures. I think about that day often, the day the sky turned red, the day our world changed forever, the day we refused to kneel. The warning was meant to make us surrender, but it made us who we are. And we are the story they will tell across the stars. The species that wouldn't break. The people who chose to fight. The humans who refused to surrender. It's been 20 years since the warning. 20 years since the red sky. 20 years since the ships arrived. 20 years since we fought back. We've changed, not just as a people but as a species. We're not the same humanity that existed before the warning. We're something more, something stronger, something harder to break. We've made allies, we've made enemies, we've made mistakes and we've learned from them. But we haven't forgotten who we are. I remember General Chen's words. We will not make it easy, we will not make it simple, and we will not make it clean. She was right. Nothing about this journey has been clean. Nothing about it has been simple. But we're still here. We're still fighting. We're still human. And we always will be.